Welcome to Your Career Unscripted. I'm your host, Jane Bernhard. I will be interviewing business leaders and recent graduates on the different perspectives, strategies, challenges, and advice on building meaningful careers across different generations. There's no right way to build your career or live your life. And I'm so excited that this show is in collaboration with Texas Immersive Institute at the University of Texas. We hope to help you define success on your terms and not anyone else's. Our guest today is Vicki Dobbs Beck, a veteran entertainment executive with more than 30 years of experience driving innovation and digital transformation in support of storytelling. In 2015, she co-founded Lucasfilm's award-winning Immersive Storytelling Studio, ILMxLAB, now ILM Immersive, and has since been at the helm. Under Vicki's leadership, ILM Immersive has produced a robust portfolio of groundbreaking experiences, including CARNE y ARENA, directed by Alejandro Iñárritu, and awarded a special Oscar by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences; Vader Immortal, a Star Wars VR series, winner of the PGA Innovation Award in 2020, and most recently, the Emmy Award-winning What If, an immersive story with Marvel Studios, the first ever interactive Disney Plus original story for Apple Vision Pro. Hi, Vicki. I am honored to have you on the show today. I am double honored to be able to interview you for the second time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I think that your career is so inspiring and different and innovative and creative. And I think there are a lot of people who can learn from your story. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some of it.
Oh, thanks so much, Jane. I'm really happy to be here. Indeed, it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. So you have had a career that has spanned over 3 decades in the entertainment space. You've spent your time focused on storytelling and innovation. If we talk about your career in terms of a story, can you tell us what have been the core chapters and what did you learn in each chapter?
Sure. So there are a lot of chapters to my story because it's a long one. But when I first graduated from college, I went to Stanford undergrad. I had a degree in international relations, basically a liberal arts degree. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I ended up going into Macy's management training program. And what I learned in that first phase is, I call it the I don't like retail and I don't like real estate phase of my career, because I did retail first, and then I did real estate securities and some real estate stuff, and I didn't like either one of those. At which point I decided to go back to business school, and I did get into Stanford Business School, went there. I think that, one of the good benefits of going to business school is it kind of gives you, I call it the get out of jail free card. You get one, where you can make a pretty radical pivot. And essentially what happened is that I did indeed choose a very non-traditional path. And I decided that I wanted to work for a company whose product was inherently creative. I didn't really set out to be in the entertainment industry per se. I looked at fashion, I looked at wine, I looked at performing arts, I looked at theater, I looked at a whole range of things. And I really had to do a lot of work on my own because Stanford was, especially at that time, was much more oriented toward investment banking, management consulting, some of the big packaged goods companies. So I just sort of kept my ears open and and I essentially used my network to find opportunities, or created a network, literally. I happened to see an article about someone named Walt Conti, who worked for Industrial Light and Magic. It was in the Stanford Daily. And I had met him once or twice before when I was an undergrad, because he was a year ahead of me. So, like I said, I used my network and managed to get a contact at ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, through Walt. So I talked to ILM about a summer job, and I offered to work for free between my 2 years at business school. And I gave them some ideas of projects that I thought I could do that might help them. And they turned me down. And I, in retrospect, I think it was literally that I think they thought I was going to be more work than what was going to come out of it. So I ended up working at the San Francisco Ballet in the development department. And then I went to my second year of business school, and I was getting really close to graduating without a job, and that was terrifying. But ironically, ILM called about 2 weeks before I was going to graduate, and they had a job opening. So I went up there and interviewed, and they actually had one job and two people that they wanted to hire, myself and another woman who had a very strong commercial production background. So we had radically different backgrounds. So they ended up taking one job and they split it in two. And so I always laugh. I think I had the most interesting, lowest paying job in my graduating business school class. So when I started there, I was like a marketing assistant, and my boss asked me, can you help? Do you know anything about writing a marketing plan? And I said, well, I do, because I just graduated from business school, but I don't know very much about the business. Do you have a business plan? And, she sort of looked at me with a little bit of a blank stare. And I said, something that talks about the competition, growth areas, forecasted revenues, that sort of thing. And she said, no, there's nothing like that. And I said, okay, well, how about if you tell me who to interview, and I will interview them, and I will write a first draft of a business plan. And even if it's 100% wrong, at least it'll be something to respond to. So apparently I wrote ILM's first business plan. But what happened as a result of that is that they started moving me around Lucasfilm. And at that time, so this would have been the late 80s, early 90s, the way that Lucasfilm sort of, explored new businesses is just by doing them. And so I felt like I was running behind them, trying to figure out whether these opportunities were sustainable. They were all interesting, but some of them weren't sustainable. And at the end of that period, I ran a small team called Lucasfilm Learning, which was actually inside of Lucasfilm Games at the time. And we were doing educational multimedia, which is really, it was at the intersection of storytelling, high fidelity imagery, such that it was back then, interactivity, and with an education lens. And that experience for me was very, very important to the rest of my career, because I loved that convergence. And the challenge is, what I learned actually is that timing is everything. And we were about 3 decades ahead of our time with what we were doing. The setup we were using was a computer-driven Laserdisc player, which most people don't even know what that is anymore. But a Laserdisc held the images, and that's how you got the high quality. And then the computer was, it was driving the search, so it knew where to go on the Laserdisc. But in any case, we created a prototype that was called Paul Parkranger and the Mystery of the Disappearing Ducks. Actually, we did several, but that was, and it's such a great analog for virtual reality, which I couldn't have obviously known at the time. But it was where you had a character, and the character introduces a mystery. The ducks are disappearing, and you have to go in. He's gone off to solve another environmental mystery, and you need to help him by exploring his cabin and trying to understand where the ducks are going. And so the interface was literally Paul's cabin, and everything in it was live. So, you could click on a file cabinet. The file cabinet would open up, and then there would be files you could look at, or there was a video player, and even fun stuff like, there was a pair of boots on the ground, and if you clicked on the boot tipped over and water, came out, and a fish. So, like I said, this was a really inspiring time for me, but unfortunately, because Lucasfilm wanted this to be a for-profit entity, I just couldn't figure out how we could make money doing this. The school market was very challenging. And so in the end, I had to help find other homes for people that I could inside of Lucasfilm, and then shut the division down. So it was, again, the big lesson there was timing is everything. And the other interesting lesson was I became sort of a quasi-expert in educational multimedia just because I was one of the first people in it. And that has happened to me twice in my career. And it's a very interesting place to be, because it's not because I was I was not a trained technologist, I was not an educator, but because I was there doing really, leading a team that was doing incredibly innovative work. Like I said, I became a quasi-expert. I left Lucasfilm, and I basically did consulting for 4 years. One of my long-term clients was Disney, ironically. And this was an important phase because one of the things I was interested in addition to the, that intersection of storytelling and interactivity and so forth, I was very passionate about this idea of cross-platform storytelling, where you're trying to, tell the right story for the right platform, but you're kind of weaving a much bigger tapestry out of these individual experiences. So I actually pitched the idea of developing a world and characters to the Nature Company, which is a company that's no longer in business. And then using story and character to get kids excited about nature and, contributing to the environment in positive ways. And then from that, we would develop a product line that sort of grew naturally out of the story. So with my husband, actually, who later became my husband, and one of my colleagues at Lucasfilm Learning, we created a world called Terratopia, and we delivered the stories in sort of graphic novel form. And then we developed a product line around it. It was another really key moment in my evolution. So first it was about the, sort of the beginning of immersive storytelling. And this was really about cross-platform storytelling. But what was happening then, once again, timing is everything, they were considered a specialty retailer. And this was at a time when I think they called them big box companies came in, but essentially warehouse companies like a Home Depot, like Staples and Office Depot, etc. And the specialty retailers, many of them went out of business, but at the very least, they went into ultra cost-cutting mode. So I continued to do consulting during that period. And then, like I said, the last was with Disney. And I ended up deciding that I wanted to go back to Lucasfilm and ILM. I loved the culture. It was, I lived nearby, etc. So those years, I call them the in-between years. So this would have been from 1996 until about 2013. I did a whole variety of things. I did operations. I did a lot of strategy and leading strategic initiatives. I helped open some of the international studios. But I was always waiting for that time. I was watching the technology converge. I was waiting for the time when you could do high fidelity real-time graphics. And I was very inspired by someone named Kim Library, who is now the CTO at Epic Games, but he was working at Lucasfilm at the time. And he started a little rebel unit that was kind of a mix of people from film and games, and created some really stunning examples of high fidelity interactive media. And that gave us the confidence to actually set up a studio. And that's how ILMxLAB came into being, which was in 2015. And our goal was to really use what were then emerging technologies like VR, AR, et cetera, to invite our fans to step inside our stories in ways that had never before been possible. So for the last 10 years, that's what I have been doing. ILMxLAB has been rebranded as ILM Immersive, but it's been really a highlight of my career, and it really spawned from that Lucasfilm learning moment.
Thank you for walking us through that. One thing I really appreciate about your career and your story that has inspired me since I heard you speak the first time, which was actually in class in business school, is that you've done so many different things, and it seems like you've had to pivot a lot. I think oftentimes people who are earlier in their career feel like they're supposed to have everything figured out, and they're supposed to have this plan of like, 1, 2, 3, I take this step, in 5 years I'm here. But you mentioned, you had to close a division. You probably, when you were in it, didn't expect for that to happen. So I'm curious if you were talking to someone who maybe feels like they're supposed to know what they want to do, but they just don't, and they feel insecure about that. What words of wisdom would you like to share?
Well, I think that you have to be a little opportunistic. And I had no idea when I walked in the door at ILM that I was going to end up writing a business plan for them. That wasn't the job that I signed up for, if you will. And I had no idea that they had so many little businesses, sort of going inside the company. But there was an opportunity. And that's why, really being very proactive about looking for those opportunities. Like I said, when I admitted that I didn't know much about the industry, so I knew that I needed a lot of input in order to write a business plan. But that was a really key moment. And then just being really open, because the combination of being open and opportunistic coupled with follow your heart, because there have been a number of paths that I could have taken. I probably would have made more money, probably would have, achieved different, maybe higher level roles. But I was so passionate about storytelling, cross-platform storytelling, innovation, that all the choices that I made were with that in mind. So I had a clear vision of what I wanted to do, but not necessarily what the roles were that were going to, sort of lead to what became my career.
I love that. Be opportunistic and be open. I think it's so important, both of them, and also just thinking about being open. Even when I think about what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2 years. I have an idea of where I would want to go, but I don't know what the path is going to be like to get there. So I really appreciate that sentiment. In terms of entrepreneurship, can you talk about co-founding Lucasfilm's Immersive Storytelling Studio, ILMxLAB, now ILM Immersive? Can you talk about the experience from idea to conception, and any hurdles you faced along the way. I feel like every person who's an entrepreneur has bumps in the road. And I imagine that some younger or even just first-time entrepreneurs will be listening to this and seeing everything you've done and feel so inspired. But I also want to like humanize the experience of building something into something so successful, but also the process of that. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So the first thing that we were looking for was, did this seem like this was going to be a growth opportunity? Quite frankly, the visual effects industry had become pretty commoditized. And by that, I mean that, people were largely competing on cost. And that when you're competing on cost, that means you're kind of in a you're at the far end of the life cycle of that business. And you have to be able to reinvent yourself. And to some extent, ILM has been doing that even in the sort of visual effects, immersive entertainment space. But one of the opportunities that I saw was these new devices that were coming online. I had the chance to put on what was called the DK2 headset from Oculus. And literally my mind was blown. I mean, I had never, where I was in this world, I put on this headset, and now I am in a completely other world. It was very simple graphics, nothing fancy about it, but it was mind blowing. And so sort of seeing that potential, and then also seeing the advances that were being made in real-time graphics, I felt there was, I actually felt that the real-time graphics alone was going to transform the entertainment industry. And it has done so. I mean, it's used in so many other places, including like virtual production and a whole variety of ways, in addition to actually being the core part of product development, like we were doing our experience development. So we sort of built a small core team of people, some from the visual effects side of the business and film business, and then we brought in people from the games business or the interactive space. And one of the challenges early on was the fact that there was a culture clash between the games culture and the visual effects culture. And the visual effects artists just had a sort of legacy of not always being sure how they were going to solve a problem, but they knew that they believed that they could do it, so they would shoot for the moon. And if they had to, they'd sort of fall back, if you will, plan B. And the games people tended to be worried about over-promising. They would rather under-promise and over-deliver. So you get these two cultures coming together, and they have to work together to create something that's never been done before. And the games people thought the effects artists were just crazy, and the visual effects artists thought that the games people were lazy. And so you get this like incredible culture clash. And so what was one of the key, not just learnings, but processes that we had to go through, was to get people to appreciate one another and their individual strengths, and really allow them to bring that to the project. So as like an example, when you're in a huge environment in VR, we basically focused the interactivity, which of course all the games people had the expertise in. Let's say it was focused in the center of that environment, but you wanted to kind of create this richness around it. So you could use actually some traditional film and visual effects techniques, because no one was going to go there. We weren't going to allow people to get close to that. So it didn't have to be interactive. so that was a really interesting challenge, and we overcame it, and we have a really tight, highly productive team now. But the other thing I would say is that what I did, they call intrapreneuring, which is setting up a new business inside of a large established company. The benefit of that is that you're not worrying about, where you're getting the money for the next paycheck. The challenge is that, especially for a very mature company like Disney and even Lucasfilm, they're not used to necessarily supporting sort of startup efforts and understanding kind of what that means, how to evaluate their success, etc. And it is, and because we were doing such bleeding edge work, we knew that we were going to try things and they weren't going to work, and we had to be prepared to fail quickly, and move on. And we also had to definitely take risks. So I do think that entrepreneurship requires a lot of courage and a lot of resilience. And people who really want stability, they don't want things changing all the time, doesn't mean they're not talented. It just, it's not a good culture fit. And that's one of the things I also really came to respect is that you have to find people who are interested and okay with that kind of very dynamic culture.
And when you talk about, first, thank you for sharing some of those challenges. It must be interesting to look back on that and to have learned so much. In talking about the challenges and just the resiliency, I'm wondering if, because you were working on some of the most beloved franchises, some of the biggest name projects, you have an audience that is inherently obsessed with the content. Did you feel the weight of those pressures and expectations? Because you mentioned you have to fail fast and pivot and pick yourself back up. I'm curious, how does that kind of correspond with the pressure of the importance of what you're doing?
Yeah, there was actually a lot of pressure. Our first big product was Vader Immortal. And actually there was an experience that preceded that, also dealing with Vader, which was a location-based experience with the Void, called Star Wars Secrets of the Empire. In both cases, Vader was the central character. And Vader is probably the most iconic character in the Star Wars universe. So it was, I think we were all humbled by the fact that Lucasfilm entrusted Vader with us in a unproven, brand new space. And we were very, I think we were always very aware of that pressure and that obligation we had to deliver a great experience to our fans. So on Vader Immortal, which is sort of related, we had been in development for a while, like more than a year. And when we had first been thinking about Vader Immortal, we were thinking about it probably more like somebody would think about a film. So you're in an environment, and the story is unfolding in front of you and around you, but you are more like a ghost. And about a year into it, we realized we were not taking advantage of the strengths of the device, as well as the fact that we were working in real time and that people could interact. So we did a major pivot, and we basically said, you have to be the center of the experience, and your unfolding relationship with Vader has to be the journey. And I think by making that decision, it really helped fans feel like they were in Star Wars, that we had created both a world and characters that felt authentically Star Wars. And we had a lot of help in doing that. We worked really, really closely there's a story group at the time, which is sort of now kind of a franchise strategy group, but it's still the people who are architecting the set of experiences and that live, that essentially embody all things Star Wars. And we had some really good partners, and they also understood what the potential for the devices was. So they helped steer us towards story space and story beats, literally, that would take advantage of those opportunities.
When you're talking about your journey and just some of the things that you've done, it sounds so collaborative. Like when I'm kind of visualizing what you're doing, it sounds like you're in the trenches with so many different kinds of people with different backgrounds, really doing something that hasn't been done before. I'm curious what you learned about collaboration and leadership while you're doing something that hasn't been done before. It's not like there's someone who's been working just in this exact space, because you're creating something new. What does it feel like to be in the trenches on such like an intense experience? And what did you learn about leadership throughout the process?
I really loved that. I loved being in the trenches, and I continue to love being in the trenches. I have always believed that collaboration is sort of essential to most things, that especially in the creative space when you're dealing with large projects. And I have never actually been one of those people who felt like people had to report to me in order for me to be effective. They do, but in earlier phases of my career, I was really about influence. And so I developed relationships, and strong relationships. And through those relationships, I could influence direction without having people necessarily report to me. So I believe that strong relationships is key. I think having vision and being able to articulate that vision is imperative, especially when you're building something new. And I have to say, it kind of gives me a little bit of a thrill, because when I listen to people talk now, they are using the same language that I have used, in the past. So I know that it's resonating. Not everything that I have said resonates, like you also learn that. But in terms of leadership, I think really supporting collaboration, making that a core principle, and then being respectful of others, and I've always tried to be as transparent as possible about what's happening, either within our group or within the company, within the industry, etc. I think that builds trust. And at the core, I think trust is probably one of the most important foundational elements.
I think what you said about influence is very interesting and leads into the question that I wanted to ask you anyways, which, if there's someone who is earlier in their career and they want to be in a leadership position someday, or they just want more autonomy or more influence, and they want to feel empowered in what they're doing day to day, do you have advice on building those skills when you're not doing exactly what you said, which is when people are not reporting to you? What can you do to build leadership skills? One of the things you mentioned is building relationships in general and building trust. Is there anything else you would kind of advise someone who wants to get to that position but doesn't know how to do it?
I think really looking for opportunities to contribute, and that might mean reaching out to people who you respect and admire, and doing a coffee or something, and just both learn from them, like how did they get to where they are, but also volunteer, like if there's a project that I could help with, then please let me know. And because that's a lot of the way that before we founded ILM xLab, I was really doing a lot of it in the context of overarching strategy, but I really leaned into the opportunity there because I was so passionate about it. The other thing I think that's important that I had to learn is that I was pretty introverted and pretty uncomfortable speaking up in meetings, or definitely didn't do public speaking. I did a little bit of public speaking when I was doing Lucasfilm learning, but then I went through this really big span of time where I was very internally focused. And so one of the other things that I think is that when I talk to people who are earlier in their careers, really like, you have to figure out how to develop a sense of confidence in yourself. And to try to, even if it feels uncomfortable, to try to speak up in meetings if you have something meaningful to say. And I say meaningful to say because one of the most annoying things is when there are people that just like speak up just for the sake of speaking up, and they just repeat something that somebody else just said. Also, to look for opportunities to speak publicly. And a good example is like maybe going back to your college and doing a talk, or in a high school, talking to high school students about what you do and how you got to where you are. I think that developing public speaking skills is a really, really empowering feeling. And it makes you more comfortable leading. It makes you more comfortable speaking up in meetings. And then it also gets you visibility. So that was a big shift for me.
I'm so glad you talked about being introverted. I could ask you like an interview's worth of questions just on that as a concept. It's interesting because I feel like a lot of leaders are introverted, but I'm curious how that affected all of that collaboration that you had to do with other people. And I ask this really because I'm super introverted, and sometimes I'm socially spent and have so much work to do and can't do it because I'm socially spent. So I'm really asking out of my own curiosity of like, if you feel like that being introverted, I'm sure it makes you so good at your job in terms of self-reflection and communication and just all of the things that we've talked about today. But I'm just curious how you also have had like the most collaborative career, and also you're such a wonderful public speaker. I'd love to just hear you talk more on it if you're comfortable.
Oh, sure. I mean, so honestly, I will say that business school was painful for me because I was so introverted, and Stanford, like Harvard, did case studies. You got called to open, or, you had to participate. It was just excruciating for me because that's just not, I wasn't comfortable doing that. And so thankfully I did graduate, etc. But I really had to force myself to overcome that. And I think it's funny that you say that you're introverted and that you you feel uncomfortable, but like just doing this podcast, I mean, this is a great example of a way to to get outside of yourself in a manner that is authentic to you, and you're really good at it. So I realize that you might feel introverted, I might feel introverted. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily perceived that way by others. And probably if I said that to some people that I work with on my team, etc., they would go, "Really? You're not introverted." So it's a process, and it's a conscious process.
Mm-hmm. I very much appreciate that. I really appreciate you saying you struggled throughout business school, because I think oftentimes people can sometimes feel like a fish out of water in such an intense experience with people who might have decades more experience in all the things you're learning about. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious, and when we're talking about confidence, I hear from a lot of people, particularly those who are either in school or just out of school, that they struggle with really wanting to be liked by their manager, by their teammates, by the company as a whole. And so they feel like they have to put on this facade of like, I know everything. And then they don't ask all the questions they're actually curious about because they're self-conscious and they want to be liked. It's a human thing to want to be liked. But I'm curious what advice you would have for someone who is maybe withholding some of what they think because they don't want to speak up because they're worried about how someone would perceive it.
When I think about wanting to be liked, of course, we all want to be liked. I like to be liked. But what I try to kind of switch it just a little bit. And, it's the golden rule, treat people as you would like them to treat you. And so that's slightly different than being liked. And I think if you kind of reframe it just a little bit, you can focus more on actions and sort of the relationship, as opposed to it sort of feeling one way. I want that person to like me. It's really a two-way. It's a two-way street, and not, you will meet people who it's not a good match, and you just know that, and that's okay, and you just you do what you have to do in order to do your job, but you don't have to. But it's okay that not everyone likes you, but I think it's important that people respect you, and so that's my my kind of reframing from being liked to treat people as you would like to be treated.
I think that's such great advice, and it takes the focus off of just being in your head to what you can do and taking ownership of that. So I love that advice. I've learned so much from this conversation in terms of being so proactive about opportunities, collaboration, the different ways to build leadership skills. I want to close out with one final question. Okay. I'm curious, how do you define success for yourself? And has there been a particular moment in your career of over 3 decades where you've done all of these incredible things where you felt like you achieved it?
For me, because I am very much a person that thinks out like 5 or 10 years, and not everybody thinks that way. But what has been, when I feel really like, okay, that was a success, a personal success, is when I am able to realize a vision. So I had a vision about what immersive entertainment would look like, what the opportunities were, but it was unproven. I mean, no one had done it before. And then to work on some really key projects that were sort of industry defining. The first one was CARNE y ARENA, which we did with Alejandro Iñárritu. It was an incredibly profound project that was a installation, a VR installation at museums, and it was about immigrants crossing the border from Mexico into the United States and getting caught. So it's like a 6.5 minute experience, but it was literally life-changing. And it created memories that still, like, even when I talk about it now, and I haven't gone through it in years, but it's still visceral. And that project was awarded a special Oscar because of visionary, storytelling in a new medium. And then recently we released a project called What If? An Immersive Story. And that was with Marvel Studios, and it was it won an Emmy for outstanding innovation in emerging programming. So the combination of that and then Vader Immortal, which was really our big first product, it won a PGA Innovation Award, the first ever. So these kind of, it does feel good when the industry acknowledges all of the hard work. And then I guess success for me is just trying to continue to push the state of the art and doing it in a way with, where there's respect and integrity, and that it's a collaborative effort. Because I always say, when we say we won an Emmy, it was a team that won the Emmy.
Thank you for sharing that. It just makes me think of you talking about knowing you wanted to be in this industry, in this field, and being so far ahead, and then being able to reflect and look back. And it's like, you've done all of those things. Like, I'm sure, not that you need me to say it, but like that younger version of you would be like, oh, you did it. You were able to do all these things. So like, it's amazing. And I'm so grateful to be able to learn from you and for you to share your story. And I'm so appreciative that you came on the show. So thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. I don't know how I'm going to like do a write-up of this, because I feel like I learned so much from like everything you said. So I'm just very appreciative.
Well, thank you. It was really fun. And as I mentioned to you before we started, it's like you start to realize like, wow, there have really been a lot of phases to my career, but I learned from every phase. And I didn't love every phase, but I definitely learned and grew. And I think that's what's important. And, you just take those lessons and use them, as you press forward.
Yeah. Okay, just my last thing. I think that's so important that you don't have to love every phase. So if someone's in a phase that they're not loving, that doesn't mean that you're in it forever. Take it from Vicki.
That's right. And at that point, it's like figure out how to make a change, or like whether it's changing within the role or changing the environment or changing the company. I've been for 32 years at Lucasfilm, so I've stayed with the same company, but I have found ways to sort of have a path where if I am not feeling fulfilled and I'm not feeling like I'm able to contribute in a meaningful way, to be able to adjust that accordingly.
I think that's amazing advice. You're the best. Thank you for such a great interview.
Thanks so much, Jane.
I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. If something about this conversation inspired you, I'd love to know. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn at Jane Bernhard if there's a guest you'd want to hear from, or if there's a type of background you'd like to learn from, and I'll do my best to make it happen. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to my Substack and socials, follow Texas Immersive Institute, and check out TXI's Patreon at patreon.com/Texas Immersive for more thought leadership on the immersive field. And of course, please share the episodes with anyone who you think might find them helpful. See you next time.